Hi everyone, in this video, we'll be discussing how to change the MAC address on a device running Kali Linux. When it comes to networking, you've probably heard of the term MAC address a lot. So in this lecture I'm going to cover, what do we mean by MAC address, what it's used for, and how to change it. MAC address stands for Media Access Control. It's a permanent, physical and unique address assigned to network interfaces by the device manufacturer. So whether you have a wireless card or a wired or Ethernet card, each one of these network cards come with a specific address that is unique to this card. So there is no two devices in the world that would have the same MAC address. And this address will always be the same to this specific device, even if you unplug it from your computer connected to another computer. Then this network device will always have the same address. So you might already know that the IP address is used in the internet to identify computers and communicate between devices. On the internet, the MAC address is used within the network to identify devices and transfer data between devices. So each piece of data or packet that is sent within the network contains a source MAC and a destination MAC. Therefore, this packet would flow from the source MAC to the destination MAC. So, because this is a physical, unique address to each interface to each network device, and because it is used to identify devices, then changing it will make you anonymous on the network. Not only that, but the MAC address is often used by filters to prevent or allow devices to connect to networks and do specific tasks on the network. So being able to change your MAC address to another device's MAC address will allow you to impersonate this device and allow you to do things that you might not be able to do. So you be able to bypass filters or connect to networks that on these specific devices with specific MAC addresses can connect to. And you will also be able to hide your identity. Now, changing the MAC address is very, very simple. To change the MAC address using the terminal, we'll use the ifconfig command. First, let's view our current MAC address by typing in ifconfig in the terminal. Then you can see the interface name and then IP address a netmask and broadcast address. Then you can see the MAC address naming Ether. In order to change the values first, we need to disable the interface. To disable the interface, we use the command ifconfig eth1 down. And then we use the syntax or command ifconfig interface name hw hardware ether value. And then we need to enable the interface using command ifconfig interface name up. Now you can see that we have changed the MAC address successfully.
Okay, now we know what a MAC address is and how to change it. What we want to do now is write a Python program or script that will do this for us automatically. Now, I know you're thinking right now that you don't know anything about Python. How are you going to write a program that will do this? Now, as I said, learning programming can get boring if you don't have a purpose. That's why I want to teach this course by example. So we're going to start programming from the start, and as we program, I'm going to teach you programming concepts and how to program in general. So this is the first proper programming lecture that we're doing, but we're going to build a very simple script that will change the MAC address for us. Now, from what you know so far, all you have to do to change the MAC address is run these commands. So if you want to write a program that does this, you first need to be able to execute Linux commands through that program. We want our program to execute terminal commands the same way we are executing them here by typing the commands manually. Now, anything that you can think of, there is probably a way to do it in Python. There is probably a Python module that does that. And I have my PyCharm in here, and I have already created a project called MacChanger. So I'm just going to create a new file, and I'm creating a Python file, and I'm going to call it MacChanger.py. Okay, I'm going to add the shebang at the top, and then the first thing that I need to do is import the subprocess module. So I'm going to have to say import subprocess. So this tells Python that I want to use the subprocess module, and import all the functions that I can use with this module. Once I do that, I'm going to use the module by doing a subprocess. So this is the module name, and then I'm going to put a dot, and you can see as soon as I put the dot, PyCharm automatically shows me all the functions that I can use with this module. And again, as you can see, as soon as I type call, it shows me the arguments or the inputs that this function takes. So I'm going to hit enter to select this function, and it will autofill the brackets for me, and it's going to give me a description of how to use this module. Now I know how to use it, so I'm just going to move my character to the middle. And in here, we're going to put our command between two quotation marks. So this is a very simple example. So all we're going to do is just run ifconfig. Now we know ifconfig shows us the interfaces that are available to our current operating system, and finally, we're going to put a comma and add the shell argument, and we're going to set that to true so that we can run shell commands through this function, and that's it, our code is done. So as you can see, it's a very simple code, and all it's going to do is it's going to import the subprocess module first. Then we're using the subprocess module and we're adding calls, and this is the same way with all modules. You put the module name first, followed by the function that you want to use that's stored in this module. So we're using the call function and we're giving it the first argument as the command that we want to execute, and in our case right now we want to run ifconfig. And secondly, we're giving it the second argument which sets the shell variable to true so we can run Linux commands through this function. Now you can see that PyCharm is telling me that there is something wrong with this, and what's wrong in here is that the shell should be a small s, not a capital S, and this is fine right now. Now I'm going to save this by doing ctrls, and then we're going to run it. You can run it from terminal or you can just go running and run, and we're going to select this script which is MacChanger. You can see how this script got executed here, and it just listed for me the result of ifconfig. So you can see that it executed the config form, and then we see all the interfaces that are available to the current rent operating system. And then all we have to do right now is change ifconfig in here with the commands that we executed here. So the first command that we want to run is going to be ifconfig LAN 0 down. Then you can actually do Ctrl-D to duplicate the line that you're currently at. So I'm going to do Ctrl-D right here. And as you can see, I have a new line exactly similar to the previous line. And in here we're going to do ifconfig LAN 0 whether, and then input the MAC address. And let's set it this time to 001-12-2344, and we'll set it to 66 this time so we can differentiate it from the previous one. And finally, I'm going to do Ctrl-D again because I'm lazy. So it duplicates the line for me. And the final command is going to be ifconfig LAN 0 up to enable the interface. And that's it. We're done. Very simple. So very similar to what we did before. We're importing the subprocess module first, and then we're using the same function, which is the call function which allows us to run system commands. And we're on Linux, so we can run any Linux commands. And we know that these commands allow us to change the MAC address. We put the interface down first, then we set the MAC address that we want to use by doing ifconfig LAN 0 whether followed by the MAC address. And then we do ifconfig LAN 0 up to enable the MAC address. Now, if we execute this script from terminal, this script should change the MAC address for us, and we won't have to run these 3 commands to do it. So I can run it by going to run here and then run, but I actually don't want to do that. I want to run it from terminal because I actually like running stuff from terminal more, because I can run other commands, and so that we can run ifconfig after it and make sure that the MAC address did actually change. So I'm going to go to my terminal and I'm going to navigate to where this project is stored. Now, if we go up here just for a second and over here, you can see that this project is stored in my user home PyCharm MacChanger. So I'm going to do cdpycharm project. And by the way, you can just press tab as you're typing a command and it will auto-complete for you. So all I have to do is type Mac and tab, and as you can see, it automatically auto-completes the Mac changer. Now, if I do ls here to list all the files, you can see I have my Mac changer script in here. Enter on this script. As usual, all you have to do is do Python Mac changer py, hit enter. And this didn't show us any errors. So this is very good. This means that things did actually work, and now if we do ifconfig LAN 0, you can see that our MAC address got changed to 00112-233-4466 instead of 55. So this means that our code in here worked. And we managed to execute these 3 system commands through our Python script. And to create that, all you have to do is just type its name. Now, in maths, we're used to using x and y when we're using variables. You can do that with Python, but it's not good practice. It's better to name your variables meaningful names, so names that are relevant to the value that's stored in that variable. You can use letters and numbers and variables, but it has to start with a letter or an underscore. You can use the underscore anywhere within the variable name, and the names are case sensitive. So since we won't use meaningful names, a very good variable name would be interface to hold the value for the interface. Now, our interface is LAN 0. So we're going to initialize that to LAN 0. Now, we have a variable or a box named interface and it has a value of LAN 0. So everywhere we use LAN 0, we can just substitute interface and Python. As it interprets the code, it will replace any occurrence of interface with the value that we set it to, which is LAN 0. Now, before I use that in the code here, because this is something new, I'm going to use it in a print statement. It's a really good idea as you go along with coding to print stuff as you're programming, so you can see what's the value for that variable at this line or this moment. So it's a good practice and it will make you understand the idea of variables more and you'll get more comfortable with it. So first of all, I'm just going to comment on all of this. Commenting on a line means that we're telling Python to ignore this line and don't treat it as code. To do that, all we have to do is just put the hash symbol before the line, or you can press Ctrl and / and that will automatically add comments to multiple lines. So whenever we run this code, all of this will be ignored. And what I want to do here, I want to use a very simple print statement. And inside it, we're just going to give a notification to the user and we're just going to say changing MAC address for. And then I want to say the name of the interface that the script will work on. So we have to use the interface variable here, and to do that, all we have to do is append this variable to the string. So like we said before, any sequence of characters enclosed between 2 quotations is treated as a string or is called a string in Python. Now, since our variable is a string as well, as you can see it's a sequence of characters as well. So all we have to do in Python is just put a plus followed by the variable name, which is interface, and that's it. Now, when we interpret this, let's go down and do it. So if we just do Python MACchanger py, you'll see it's going to print for me changing MAC address for. And instead of the interface here, it replaced it with the value that we have here, which is LAN 0. Now, this is cool, but if you look at our code here and remember what we said, we also want to use a variable for the MAC address value. So let's do that. Let's call this variable now new MAC and let's set that to 001-12-2344 and we'll set it to 77 this time. So it's different than the last time. Now, again, simply by doing this, we created a new variable or a new box or a new container that's called new MAC. And its value is a sequence of characters enclosed between two quotations. So it's a string. Now, let's append that to our string in here. So we have the string in the print statement. And I want to say changing the MAC address for the interface. So for LAN 02 and then put the value of the MAC, which we are going to change the current MAC address to. So again, just to append the string, all we have to do is just put a plus followed by the rest of the string, which is we're saying changing the MAC address for interface 2. And then we want to put the value of the new MAC address again. All we have to do is put a plus followed by the new MAC and that's it. So all we're saying is changing MAC address for, we close the quotation and then we put our variable. Because if we put the variable inside the quotation, Python will think this is part of the string and it'll just print it as an interface. It won't substitute its value with LAN 0. The same goes for using the new MAC here. If you put that inside the quotation, it'll just treat that as a string and it won't print its value. So now, if we go down and just run our code again, as you can see, it's printing changing MAC address for LAN 0. So it substituted the value of interface with LAN 0 with the value that we initialized it to, and it's changing it to the new MAC again. It's substituting the new MAC variable with this. Now, just as a quick test, I know I spend a bit too much time on this, but just as a quick test, if I put the new MAC here inside the string and run this, you'll see that the interface will be substituted with the value of LAN 0. But Python will not know that new MAC is a variable. It will just print it as part of the string because we put it inside the quotation mark. First of all, I'm going to uncomment these statements because Python is ignoring them now. And to do that, you can manually just remove the hash in the front of the lines or just highlight the lines that you want to uncomment and press Ctrl and /. Now this is done. If you look at the code here, you can see the first part of this function is actually string. So it's a sequence of characters enclosed by two quotation marks. Therefore, if we want to replace this with the value that's stored in this variable, we have to do it the same way that we did it in our print statement. So all we have to do here is we have to close the quotation marks, the strings, and we have to append or put our variable in the middle of the string like so. It's very similar to the way that we're using it in here in this print statement. Again, we have to do it in this line and same for this line. And that's it. Now, whenever Python runs, it's going to replace interface here with the value that we initialize it to in here. One more thing that we need to do is use the new MAC. So I actually modified this code in the previous lecture to show you the difference of using the variable inside and outside the quotation marks. So I'll just fix this here and we also need to use it in here. And again, all we have to do is just append the code in here. So I'm removing the MAC that's hard-coded within the string and then I'm going to append the new MAC to the string. So, as you can see now, we're actually using the same concept that we used when we were using the variable within the print statement. And that's why I was saying it's very useful to get into the habit of printing your variables and using the print function. Also, sometimes it's a good idea if you're running system commands like this. Maybe you can just print this right here. So you can just copy this and use it in a print statement and make sure that your command is being interpreted by Python the way that you want it to look like. So I'm going to save this and let's run our code and see what happens. So my current MAC address ends with 66, as you can see here. And if we run our program, you can see it's given us a nice print statement. And then if we do, if config LAN 0, you'll see the MAC address has changed to 77. Now, What's really handy with using the variables is, let's say you want to change the MAC address of a different interface, not for LAN 0. You would have had to change the value in all of the commands in here. And if you have a bigger code, then you would have had to went and looked for every single time you use that value and change it to the new value. Whereas in our code, let's say I want to change the MAC address of 880, which is another interface that I have here. So if I do ifconfig 0, you can see its MAC address ends with 77, actually now. So let's change the new MAC and make it end with 88 and run our code. Now, if we do ifconfig 880, again, as you can see, the MAC address changed to the new value. So instead of going through the whole code and changing the value for LAN 0, all we had to do is just change it in here and set that to 880. Same goes for changing the new MAC. If you had a big code, you would have had to look which line of this code changed the MAC address instead. If you have everything here on the top or in one place, then it's very easy for you to change it and not to worry. Where this variable is used, all you have to do is just change its value here, and then it'll change all over the code. So we already have a variable called interface. And all we have to do, instead of initializing it like this, we want the user to put this value for us. So instead of initializing it and saying 880 here, we're going to say the interface is going to equal to the input that the user will give me. And inside this we're going to put the text that the user will see. So we're going to ask for the interface. Same goes for the MAC. So instead of initializing the MAC within the code like this, we're going to say new MAC is going to equal to, and I want that to be taken from the user input. So we're using the input function and I want the user to see a message asking for the new MAC. So in that message I'm going to say new MAC. That's it, we're going to store this and let's run it and see what it's going to look like. So Python MAC changer py, and as you can see, the program will not execute further code. It will stop and it will first ask me for the interface. So whenever I put LAN 0 in here, this will automatically initialize interface to LAN 0 because we said interface equals input and I'm giving the input in here. So the user is given the input themselves through the terminal. Now if I hit enter, now we got an error because this is actually a Python 3 function. So we have to say Python 3 in here because if you just type Python, it will run with Python 2.7. So we'll run this again, it's asking me for the interface. We set that to LAN 0. Now the code will stop again and it asks me for the new MAC. So we're going to set that to 001-12-2344 and I'm going to go for 44 again to just use something different to make sure that this code is going to work. And now the code has already initialized interface with LAN 0. Once I hit enter, it's going to initialize new MAC with the value that I just input, which is the new MAC. Then it's going to use it in here and in here exactly the same way as before. So let's hit enter and see what happens. It's printing the right print statement for us. So it's telling us that it's changing MAC address for LAN 0 to this MAC address. So again, the print statement, it's a really good way of knowing that interface and new MAC actually hold the values that we want. So they hold the values that the user did actually input. Because when your code gets more complicated, you can make mistakes and maybe the variables will not hold the value that you expect them to hold. So let's do ifconfig LAN 0 and see if the MAC changed. And as you can see, it actually did get changed to the MAC address that we want. Now, going back to this error, we got this because we were running the code using Python 2.7, not Python 3. And like I said, these two versions are very, very similar. So if you want this code to run with Python 2.7, all you have to do is just type row input instead of input, so the function has a different name. So we change that to row input, and we change that to row input going down. And we're just going to run it this time with Python, not Python 3. Hit enter. Ask me for the interface. Let's set it to 880 this time and set the new MAC to 0.0.112-233-4422. Hit enter. We get the right values in the print statement, the right interface and the right MAC address. And if we do, if config 880, you can see the MAC address changed to 4422, the same MAC address that we set in here. Now, this is very useful and works perfectly as shown in that lecture. The only problem with this is that the way we used the variable here is not very secure. Now, this might not be a problem when it comes to simple scripts like this, but I just want to give you this note so that you keep it in mind whenever you're writing your programs. It's not very secure because we're allowing the user to input anything they want in here and then we're not checking what this input is. So we're supposed to only allow the person to enter a name for the interface and a value for a new MAC. But the user can misuse this program and enter Linux commands. Then these commands are going to be substituted here in the subprocess call module and they'll be executed on the system. Now, again, as I said in the scenario of this program that we're writing right now, this might not be a very big issue, but you can argue the fact that this program is not very secure or is not very well implemented because it allows the user to use it to do other things than its purpose. So let me show you what I'm talking about. We all know if we do ls it will list all the files in the current directory. And as you can see, I have my Mac changer and VM directory. Now let's run our Python script. And then when it asks me for the interface, I'm going to put LAN 0. But I'm also going to put a semicolon and put another command. Now the semicolon in Linux is used to tell the terminal that I want to execute another command after the current command. So that's why I'm putting it here. And then I'm going to put, which is my second command. So what's going to happen now is the interface variable is going to have a value of LAN 0 semicolon ls, that's going to be substituted here. So this command is going to become ifconfig LAN 0, end of command because we have the semicolon. And then the next command is going to be ls. So I'm also going to put another semicolon after it to make sure that whatever comes after this command is going to be treated as another command. And now when I hit enter, you'll see that we'll manage to hijack Mac changer py, which is our program, and get it to execute other commands on the system that the program is not supposed to execute. So we're just going to put anything for Mac. So as you can see, the first command was ifconfig LAN 0 and this is its result. And then it executed ls, which is my second command. And this is its result. As you can see, it's listed in the files and the current working directory. Now, this output is repeated 3 times because the interface is used 3 times here in these 3 lines. So basically what's happening is a user can hijack our program and get it to execute other commands that the program is not supposed to execute, and the user is not supposed to be allowed to do these things through our program. And again, this might not be vital in this simple script that we're writing right now, but you want to keep this in mind whenever you're writing your programs. Now, there is a very simple fix to this issue, and it can be implemented using the second way of calling subprocess. So we're doing a subprocess call, and then instead of giving a script, we're going to give a list. So we're going to open a square bracket and close it. And again, each element in here is going to be a string. And every time we see a space, we're going to close the element. So the command that we always use is usually ifconfig. Then we're not going to put a space, we're going to go outside the string, put a comma space, and then type the next part, which is our interface, as you can see here. Now, because the interface is a variable, we don't need to enclose it in 2 quotation marks. So we're just going to type that the way it is. Then the next argument of the ifconfig command is down. And again, we're enclosing this with 2 quotation marks, because down is a string, it's part of the command. So if you compare this with that, it's very similar. The only difference is, instead of adding everything in a string, we have a list in which each element is a word in that command. So every time we see a space, we put it as a separate element. Now, this is the first time you see a list, and it's a very good example. As you can see, a list is just several elements that we enclose with 2 square brackets, this bracket, and this bracket. Now, we're going to have to do the same with the next 2 commands. So to duplicate the current line, I'm just going to do Ctrl+D twice. As you can see, it's doing it for me automatically. And now I just need to do the second command. So the second command is already the ifconfig interface. Now, this shouldn't be damaged. This should be set to HW, put a comma, and the next word is the editor. Put a comma. And finally, we put the new mark. Again, we don't need to enclose this in quotation marks because it's a variable. And finally, the last command is going to be ifconfig interface up instead of down. And that's it. So these 3 commands are a much more secure version of these 3 commands. It's more secure because now Python knows that the interface and down are all part of the same command, which is ifconfig. So even if I try to hijack the interface variable and put a command in here, Python will know that this should not be treated as a command, and it will try to execute it within the ifconfig command here. This will return an error, but it won't allow attackers to hijack the flow of our program. Now let's delete all of this, save and test our program. So I'm going to clear all of this, and we have our program here. It's asking me for the interface, and I'm going to do 0 and follow it with ls as we did before. I'm going to hit enter, and put anything for mag. And as you can see, it's complaining about the existence of the quote and the ls, and then it's complaining about the interface name, but it's not executing the ls on the system. So a person cannot use this program to do anything other than we want them to do. Now let's test the program and make sure that it works. So we'll set the interface to LAN0 and put a new MAC. And I'm just going to do 3. 3. 3. This time we got the right message. Let's do it if the config lands 0. And as you can see, the MAC address is changed properly to 112,233 and the program is working as expected. Something similar to what the social engineering toolkit does. But I think for a simple program like this one it would make more sense if we can get our user to input the values as arguments. So what I mean by arguments is it'll be cool if we can allow the user to do something like python.py and then give me the values by doing interface, set it to LAN0 and then do MAC and give me the new MAC. Now, if we actually want to implement something like this, it's not going to be easy because first of all, we need to implement some way of reading all of this, everything that comes after the command. We also need to be able to read the option names or the arguments here, and we need to read the option values, which is LAN0 and the new mug. And we also need to display a help message for the person when they don't give arguments or when they ask for help. For example, with all of the known commands, if you just do ifconfig help, you'll get a long menu showing the help and how to use all of the arguments that come with the ifconfig command. So you can do this, It's possible that you can write all of this yourself, or you can just use an already made module by Python, and that's what we're going to do. So in order to use a module just like subprocess, we need to import that module. So to do that, we're going to do import module name, which is optparse. So optparse is the name of the module that allow us to get arguments from the user and parse them and use them within our code. Now, importing the module doesn't mean that your program is going to automatically use it. As you can see, it's actually written in gray right now, and it's telling us that it's unused because we never use this module with our code. So when you import something, you tell Python that I'm going to use some code that exists within this module, but you actually have to call it within your code to use it, similar to this subprocess when we called it in here. So the next step now is to call this module and get our program to recognize user input and parse it. To do this, we're going to create a parser object. So you can think of this object as an entity or a person that knows everything about parsing and arguments and can handle all of that itself. So it's a person or an entity that we're going to use in our program that will handle user input for us. So to create this object or this entity, we're going to say parser equals optparse, which is the name of the module that we just imported, and we want to create an option parser. Now, parser here is just another variable, so it's similar to interface and new mug. The difference is the value that it holds is different than the value that's held in here. So for example, interface here gets whatever value that is returned by the raw input. And the raw input returns whatever the person enters. And the person enters a sequence of characters for the name of the interface. So the interface usually holds a value of a string, a sequence of characters. Parser, on the other hand, is going to hold the value of whatever optparse option parser returns. Now notice the name here starts with a capital letter. This is a naming convention in Python, and basically everything that starts with the capital letter means that it is a class. And what a class is, it's basically code, or you can think of it as rules or a blueprint for the object. So it determines what we can do with the parser object. It's basically all the code that can read the user input. Like I said in here, when you do interface, for example, it's all the code that displays the help message. It's all the code that stores the values that the user enters. All of it is stored in the option parser class. But you can't use the class as is. You need to create an instance of that class. And that's what we're doing here. We're creating an entity or an object, and that object is stored in the parser variable. Now again, we're going to be using objects a lot throughout the course, and as we use them it will become clearer. So right now we created an instance of the option parser class, which is an object that can handle parsing for us. Now you can think of this parser object as a child, so it has all the abilities that it inherits from its father, which is the class to handle parsing. But since it's a child, we still need to tell it what kind of arguments to look for and how to handle them. So we're going to start teaching this child by doing parser adoption. And basically what we're doing now is we're giving it the first argument that it can expect from users. So this argument is going to be I to specify the interface. We're also going to say the user can either give you I or they can give you interface to specify the interface. Then we're going to say dest equals interface. And what we mean by dest is this is the name where the value of the interface is going to be stored. So this is how we're going to be retrieving the user input. Again, let's keep doing this, and it's going to become clearer once we actually get it done. Finally, we're going to give it the help message to display to the user if they require help, and we're going to set that to interface to change its MAC address. Okay, so it's very simple so far. So all we're doing is we're teaching this parser object or child. We're telling it that I want you to allow the user to enter a value. That value, they can enter it under the I or interface argument. Whatever value they enter, I want you to store it under interface. And if the user requires help, then display this help message to explain what this argument is. Finally, we are going to tell this child to parse the arguments that it gets from the user. So to do that, we are going to say parser dot. And as you can see, when you actually press the do, PyCharm will automatically show you all the methods that you can invoke on this object or this child. So what we wanted to do is we just wanted to learn or understand what it got so far. So we wanted to parse arguments. Now let's go down to our program. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to do Python Mac changer py and I'm just going to do help. Okay, so this is perfect. Now, because we're using opt parse, and because we created the option parser here, you can see that our program automatically displays a help message. When we do help, you can see that this message has given us the usage. So it's saying we can use this program by doing Mac changer py followed by the options. And the options are you can either do H or help to see this help message, or you can do this option. And this option is the first option that we created in here and added using the add option method. So you can see that it tells us to use this option. You can either use I or dash interface. So this is what we set in here. We set to use either I or dash interface. You can also see the help message that we set in here is being displayed in here, telling the user that you can use this option to set the interface to change its MAC address. So far, so good. Let's add the next argument, which is the MAC. So because as you know, I'm lazy, I'm just going to do Ctrl D in here and that will duplicate this line for me. And now all I have to do is just change the options here. So the next option that I'm adding to my parser option object is the option to allow the user to enter a new MAC address. So we're going to use M for the MAC or they can do MAC to give me the MAC. We're going to store this under new MAC and in the help, we're going to say new MAC address. Okay, just another option we added. It is the same as we added the one before. And because we're calling the parser patriarchs, we don't need to do anything more. If we go down and run the help again, you can see we have a new option which is M or dash MAC. And the help message for this is it's the new MAC address that the person wants to use. Now, this is all good. Now we're displaying the right help message. We can accept user input using the arguments. The only thing is we're still not able to use the values that the person enters. So we're still not using it anywhere in the code and we don't even know how to use that. Now let's have another look at our code. So first we're creating an object that can handle user input using arguments. Then we're adding options to this object. And finally, we're using a method with this object that's called parseArgs which allows the object to understand what the user has entered and handle it. It also returns the arguments and the values that the user entered into a variable if we give it a variable. So it returns two sets of information. It returns the arguments and the values. So for example, let's say we run Python Mac changer.py and set the interface to LAN 0 and we set the MAC to 0112-233-4455. In this case, the arguments are interface and MAC and the values are LAN 0 and 112-233-4455. So that's why when we call parser parseArgs, it's going to go through everything that the user inputs here, and it will separate it into two sets of information. The first set is arguments, which are interface and MAC. And the second one is the values or options, which are LAN 0 and the MAC address in here. So to capture these two sets of information we have to use variables. And to do that we're going to do it because we're using two variables in one line. We're going to have to use two brackets, and we're going to say options arguments are equal to whatever parse argues will return to me. So you can think of this as a function. It's a method, not a function. And we'll talk about that in more detail later on. But what you need to understand is this method will return two sets of information arguments and options. And to capture this we're using two variables, we're calling them options. Arguments are equal to whatever this is going to return to me. Now keep in mind all the names I'm using here for parser options arguments. I'm picking these names because I want to. You can use XYZ if you want to, but as I said, it's good to use meaningful names because it makes programming easier and makes our code clearer. So after this line, the options variable is going to contain the values, so it's going to contain LAN 0 and 112-233-4455, and the arguments variable is going to contain the arguments, so it's going to contain interface, MAC. So by understanding this you probably know that we're not going to use the arguments variable right now because we never really use the arguments within our code. But what is useful to us is the options here, because this is what contains the values that the user inputs to access the value for the interface, which is LAN 0. All we have to do is do the options interface. So it's whatever value that we used in the desk here. The same goes for the MAC address. If we want to access the value that the user set for the MAC address, all we have to do is just do options new mug. So again it's the value that we set and the desk in here. So you can replace every occurrence here of interface with options interface and every occurrence in here of new MAC with options new MAC. Or to make it easier and make our code more readable, we can just do interface equals options interface and new MAC equals options new MAC. And that's it, we're done. Now, since the interface and new MAC are already being used in here, there is nothing else we need to do. Now let's go and run our code. I've already typed my command, so we're doing Python MAC changer. We're giving it the interface, which is LAN 0, and we're giving it the MAC, which is this. If we hit enter, you'll see the print statement is printing the right values for us, and if we do if config LAN 0, you'll see that my MAC address got reset to the address that we want here. Now let's use the program using the shorter arguments using the I and M. So we can just do Python MAC changer py, and we can just do I like this, and let's change the MAC address. This time for 880, and DOM set the new MAC and hit enter again. The print statement is working fine, and if we do config 880, you'll see that the address changed to what we wanted it to. Now our program is pretty good. It accepts user input using arguments. It displays the help message if the target person wants to. And the person can set a MAC and an interface through the command line, and it will execute it and change the MAC for them. Now so far we built a good enough program. It can take user input, and based on it, it changes the MAC address of the interface that the user specifies to the MAC address that they choose. What I don't like about it right now though, is it looks a little bit messy, and I think it can really use some refactoring. Now we know that this code works very well, and if we bundle this inside the function, then we can reuse this function any number of times. Even in the future. If we write bigger programs and need to be able to change the MAC address from within that program, then we can just call this function instead of having to type its code again. Not only that, but we can also bundle this in a separate file, and then we can just import this the same way that we import subprocess right here and call a MAC changer function. So we won't even have to worry about the code written in this function. Maybe in a year or 2 year or 5 year time from now, you want to be able to use a code that changes the MAC address. You won't have to rewrite it. You won't even have to remember how to change the MAC address. All you have to do is just call the function that you created before. So let's try and bundle all of this inside a function and use it from our code. Now first of all, you can define a function like so. You just have to type dev followed by the function name. And it's a good idea to use meaningful function names. So we'll call this function changeMac. OK. Now followed by this, you need to put 2 brackets, and between these 2 brackets we are going to specify the input that this function takes. So we know in order to change the MAC address, we need an interface and we need a MAC address. So we're going to call these interface and new MAC. Again, the names here are completely up to you. You can use any name that you find suitable. You can use X and Y if you wanted, as long as they are valid variable names. Once you define the function name and the inputs that it takes, all you have to do is just put call on here at the end of the line and then hit enter. Now you'll see automatically PyCharm has indented this and put a tab for our cursor. This is to show that everything that we're going to write now is going to be part of the changeMac function and it's going to be part of this block of code. Now the goal of this function to change the MAC address. And we already know the instructions to change the MAC address. It's these instructions right here. So I'm just going to cut them Ctrl X and paste them here. What's very important to note is all of the code that is part of this function need to be indented, the same indentation in here. So all of the code that starts in here, this is part of the normal Python program or script. Everything that's indented in here is part of the changeMac function. This is how Python separates blocks of code based on indentation. That's it. Now our function is done. We have a function called changeMac. It takes an interface and a new MAC. And whenever we call this function, it will execute all the instructions in here. So if we don't call this, nothing is going to happen. Let me show you what I mean. If I go down on my Python program and run the same command that we used to run before, and let's change that to 22 at the end, you can see that we didn't get a print statement. And if I do, if config 880, you'll see that the MAC address did not change. This is because we defined the function here, but we never used it in here. So it's kind of similar to when we import a module but never use it. So now what's happening is whenever you run Python it's going to read this, read that. This is a function, but not execute any of that. And then it will go back in here and start executing from the parser. It will read the stuff that the person enters. It'll parse them, it will get the interface and all of that, but it will never call changeMac. So all we have to do in here is call changeMac. Now, as you can see, PyCharm automatically knows what I need to give to this based on the definition in here. So it's telling me that I need to give it an interface. And we know that the value for the interface is stored in options interface. So I'm actually going to use this directly and instead of using the interface variable in here, so I'm just going to do options interface. And for the Mac, we're going to use options new Mac and I'm going to delete these 2 lines because we don't need them. They just store the value of options interface and options new Mac in a new Mac. But now I'm using it directly. I'm using options interface and options new Mac in the changeMac function. So now when Python reaches this line, it's going to read, okay, this is a call for changeMac. I'm going to use the interface as the first input here and use new Mac as the second input in here. Call this function, execute all of this code, which will change the MAC address for me. Let's test it out. Going down. Run the same exact command that we did before, but it didn't work. Right now it printed the statement for me, which means that it actually did get into this block of code. And then if we do, if config 880, you'll see that the MAC address did change to the MAC address that I want. Now, as you can see, the code already looks neater. And now every time I need to change the MAC address, I won't have to use these 4 lines anymore. All I have to do is just call change MAC anywhere I want in my code, give it the interface, give it the new MAC, and it'll change it for me. Not only that, but in the future you'll learn how to put this in a special file and be able to call it from any Python program that you want. This will allow you to change the MAC address within any program that you write without having to worry about the code used in this function. Something similar to the way that we use input, print, row, input, and so on. Now, in the previous lecture, we learned what functions are, how to define a function and how to call it. We also learned that functions can take input like the one that we just created and they can return input. But as you can see, the one that we created here, the change MAC function, does not return anything because it doesn't need to. It only takes interface and a new MAC and it changes the MAC address for the interface. So in this lecture, let's continue organizing our code. We're going to create a new function, and as we do that, we'll also have an example of a function that returns a value. So first of all, I just want to make this tied here, and we're going to create our new function here, and we're going to call this new function getArguments because I want this function to parse the user input and return to me the arguments and the values entered by the user. So it's basically what this code in here does. So all we have to do is just copy all of this and paste it in my function, but make sure that there is a tab, there is a distance in here before we paste this so that all of this will be considered as part of the function. Now I'm going to just delete these blank lines here and that's it. We have our parser. So we have a function called getArguments. What it does is it creates our parser object. It adds an option of the interface, it adds an option of the mug. And finally it's parsing the user input using parser parsix and storing the values in options and arguments. The only problem is options and arguments are only accessible within this function right here. They're only accessible within this block of code. So even if we call this function in here at the bottom, the same way that we called our change MAC, you'll see that pycharm is still telling us that options is an unresolved reference. It's still not going to know what options is because it's only used within the function in here. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go down on my program and I'm just going to run the exact same command that we always run, and you'll see that we're going to get an error. And it's a good idea to learn how to read these errors and understand what's going wrong because you'll definitely get errors in the future. So you can see that it's telling us that the error is in a file called MacChangerPy. So this is the file that contains my code. The error is on line 22 and it's listing the line that contains the error. And it's given us the error type, which is a name error. And the problem is the name options is not defined. So going up for line 22, we can see that it's even underlined in red here because Python doesn't know what options is. We never used it in here. Each block of code here is separate than the main program. Even though we're calling getArguments and even though we're setting options and arguments to equal to the parsers, this variable is only usable within this block of code. So in order to capture the value that's in here, what we need to do is I'm going to delete all of this. I'm actually going to cut it, not delete it, and we're going to say return parser parsix. So whenever you get called, I want you to execute all the code in here and return parser parsix value to the location where you get called from. So we're calling all of this on line 21 in here. And because we're using this return instruction in here, getArguments now will return whatever parser returns, and we can capture it the exact same way that we capture parser by doing options arguments equals getArguments. Okay. So all we did is we copied all the code that we used to parse the arguments inside a function called getArguments. Instead of initializing a variable at the end, we returned the value that the parser returns. Then whenever we call this function, we capture the returned value here using other variables. So we're using options arguments equals this. And then again, options is being called here. Now Python knows what options is equals to, and it can run the change mac function. So here is what's going to happen when we execute the Python program. It's going to skip all of this, and the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to run the getArgument function. The getArgument function will read all the arguments entered by the user. It will parse them in here, and once done with that, it will return the two sets of information, the arguments and the values. Because we're using the return instruction, whatever that's being returned with this function is being captured by options and arguments, then we're calling the change mac. So Python is going to go here, we're giving it the interface, we're giving it the MAC, and then it will execute all of these commands which will change my MAC address. Now let's test this code using the same command. Let's just set the MAC address to be 33. At the end, hit enter, get the right print message. And if we do, if config 880, you'll see that my MAC address did actually get changed. Now if we look at our code right now, it looks much nicer, much more readable, and it's also reusable because we can reuse any of the functions whenever we want. So now we have the code for the main program in here, and that's only 2 lines. And then all the functionality is encapsulated into 2 functions. One of them gets the arguments entered by the user, and the other one changes the MAC address based on the argument that the user entered. Now that we are happy with the way the code looks, we're ready to add more features to the program. One thing that I need is very important, and that the program is lacking, is checking if the user is actually inputting all the required arguments. So we know that the program will not work if the user does not input an interface or a new MAC. But if someone goes to the terminal and, for example, runs the program by saying MAC changer IETA 0 and not give a MAC, you'll see that Python will just throw an error. Now, to us this is useful as a programmer, but to the user this is not nice at all. We want to display a meaningful error to the user telling them that you forgot to give us a MAC address. Please make sure you input a MAC address. Now, in order to do this, we need to implement some decision making in our program. We need a way to check and make sure that the user entered a value for the interface and also entered a value for the MAC. To do this, we'll need to use an if statement. Now from before, we know that the options variable in here contains the values for the interface and for the MAC address. So all we have to do is check if options interface and options new MAC contain values. We're going to have to do this check in here because the options is being captured in here. I don't really like to do that because we have a getArguments function and we should do everything that's related to the arguments within this function. That's why what I'm going to do, I'm going to revert back to something that we had before when we actually used to capture the arguments in here. And what we're doing now is very similar to what we were doing before. We're initializing the options and the arguments with whatever is being returned from the parser and parse args. So the options is going to contain the values entered by the user, and the arguments is going to contain the arguments entered by the user. Now we're going to use our if statement after that. So following the syntax that I showed you in the previous lecture, we have to first do the if statement followed by the condition. And like I said, there is a large number of ways to write conditions. We can compare values. For example, if we have variables, we can check if x is equal to 1. For example, we can check if something is greater than something, if something is smaller than something, if a list contains an element, and so on. In today's lecture we're going to use something that's relevant to our goal, and we want to check if options contains a value for the interface and if it contains a value for the MAC address. So our first condition is going to be if options interface. That's all we have to do. So all we're saying is if options.interface, then we put the call on and then we can execute code. And as you can see, automatically PyCharm has indented the space for us and it's allowing us to write code in here, which means this block of code will only be executed if this condition is true. And our condition is if options interface. So if options interface holds a value. Now, if you think of it, we don't want to check if options interface holds a value, we want to check if it does not hold a value, then we want to show an error. So what we're going to do is we're going to do if not options interface, then we're going to write code to handle error. Now I'm putting this as a comment because I want to get back to it later. Now the next thing that we want to do is to check if the user entered a value for the MAC address, which is short for else if. And we're going to say again if not options new MAC. And again in here we're going to execute code to handle error. Okay. Now I didn't put any code in here because I want to have a quick look on the if statements and then we'll put our code. So what we're doing now is we're checking if not options interface. So if the user did not put a value for the interface, then we want to display an error and exit. If they did, then we're going to move to the next check and we'll check if they did not enter a value for the new mug. If they didn't, then we'll also print an error and exit. Now you can just use a normal print statement and then use an exit statement in Python to exit. Or we can actually use the parser object to handle this for us, because remember when we created the parser object here we said this is an entity or person that knows everything about parsing and can handle all aspects of parsing. So we can just do parser error. And what this will do, as you can see, it's already shown us how to use it. It will basically display the message that we put and exit. So the message that we're going to display to the person is going to say please specify an interface, use help for more info. And again we're going to use a similar instruction for this one. The only difference is we're going to say please specify a MAC, use help for info. Now this is all good. One thing that we haven't done so far is handle the code after the if statement. So after this if statement, if we reach this line, line 16, that means the user put an interface and put a new MAC. So we should be able to change the MAC for them. So all we have to do at this point is return options. And I chose to return options because we never use the arguments in our program. So it makes sense to just return the options from the get arguments in here, and then when we're calling get arguments here we have to capture the value of options, and I'm just going to create another variable and I'm going to call it options, and that's it. Now let's have a quick look at our program. Up to this line we know that options and arguments will contain the arguments and the values returned by parser, which is the values and the arguments entered by the user. Then we're using an if statement. In the first condition we're checking if the interface is not set. If it's not set, then we're going to display please specify an interface and then exit the program. If it is set, then this condition is false. We're going to go to the next condition and we're going to check if the options new MAC is set. If it's not set, then we're going to display all of this and exit. So if we reach this line and we didn't exit the program, then that means we have an interface and we have a new MAC. the variable that holds the interface, and the new MAC is the options. So we can just return that. We're capturing this in here where we are calling the get arguments, and then we're using options interface and options new MAC in the change MAC, which will execute all of this and change the MAC address for me. Now, let's go and run this program and see how it's going to handle the errors. So first of all, let's run it without a MAC address. And as you can see, it's given us the usage and it's given us the error message that we specified saying, please specify a new MAC. Use help for more info. Now let's try to give it a MAC, but not give it an interface. And again, we get an error message telling us please specify an interface. Now, if we run the program properly just to make sure that it works, and this time let's change the MAC address to something that ends with 11, hit enter, we get a proper print statement, and it's if we do if config 880, you'll see that the MAC address did change to the MAC address that we want.
The changes we made using the terminal will only persist until the next reboot. To make the changes permanent, we'll need to update the MAC address in the network configuration files. And there you have it, a step-by-step guide on how to change the MAC address on a device running Kali Linux. Remember to always be responsible when using these techniques and to stay within the law. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more awesome tech tutorials.